Have you ever had to rely on a green unit that either feels like they have negative stats or negative IQ or just both? Have you ever been forced into an awkward position, just have an important character die to some small crit that shouldn't even fucking be there? Have you ever lost a character because the game put them in bumfuck nowhere and you didn't have the tools to save them? Have you ever played Thracia? When it comes to Fire Emblem, whether it be low percentages hitting, high percentages missing, terrible AI, or just downright bizarre map design, there's always bullshit to be had. And one of those specific bullshit chapters is exactly what I'm here to vent about today. So sit back, get ready to be frustrated by proxy, and welcome to Fire Emblem Bullshit.
Oh, Tubeless is gonna Karen? No! That's not my fault. I can't be blamed for that. No! What? Are you kidding me? He just double crit me. Wait, what? What just happened?
22%, I'm down. Oh my
I'm gonna go use the bathroom. I'll be right back. What the fuck was that?
Oh well. Sometimes you lose the RNG, it happens. If you have ever played Fire Emblem 7, and especially if you've ever done an Iron Man playthrough, you're probably aware of one specific chapter in the game. And that is, of course, Battle Before Dawn. This chapter is the most RNG-based thing in the entire game and can completely ruin runs, depending on how the green units act, or specifically one green unit. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Jafar, you little bastard. But more on him later. Now, initially looking at this map, whether you've played it or not, you can probably figure out why it's so annoying. We have one green unit that's in charge of defending another green unit, and player units are extremely far away from the green unit you have to protect. This means that player agency is extremely low, and player reliance on green units, or RNG, is extremely high, and that leads, pretty obviously, to a lot of frustration. Now, before we get into the green units, I just want to mention the boss of this chapter, or specifically the bosses of this chapter. These are not as bullshit for sure as the green units, but I just want to take mention of them. First, we have Ursula, who's a really strong Valkyrie. She's in the bottom right part of the map. She has bolting, so not much to talk about with her. Bolting is really does a lot of damage, and specifically something bullshit can happen with one of the green units in her, but I'll talk about that later. But then there's Maxime, and I just wanted to mention Maxime because he's a really interesting unit. So for some reason, Fire Emblem 7 has a few of these paladin sub-bosses. There's two in the game. They're much more similar to bosses from like Genealogy or Thracia than the actual GBA games. They have names, but they're not important in the story. The other one is on Dragon's Gate, but this dude is jacked up. He is jacked up on hard mode bonuses, let me tell you. There's nothing really bullshit about him per se. My man does have over 60 health, which is kind of bullshit just because you shouldn't have over 60 health as a paladin. Um, but you know, nothing outstandingly bullshit. You can look up his stats. And the thing is, player stats in Fire Emblem 7 just aren't that high. I mean, the thing is, player stats in Fire Emblem 7 just aren't that high. In fact, Harkin, the hero that you just recruited, is one of the strongest characters in the game. Will likely be stronger than even a lot of the characters that you're using. And even he can't double or deal really that much damage against Maxime. Either forces you to move around him, which makes it take longer, or fight him, which can also take time. Again, it's not bullshit. I just wanted to mention it because it's a great example of the fact that Fire Emblem just does not test hard mode. I would highly doubt that this character would often roll over 60 health if they did, but I just think it's kind of funny. Alright, so let's start by talking about the green units. We're going to start with Nino. Nino is 100% the least frustrating of the green units on this map. She is a very low level mage, so she can't really do much. She's going to spend the chapter fighting a monk. It's pretty pointless. I guess she does prevent the monk from getting to Zephiel, but ultimately she doesn't do a lot throughout the chapter, so there's not a lot to mess up. Now there's two kind of bullshit things that can happen with her. The first is the monk critting her. He has a 2% chance to do this with about a 70% hit, so it's pretty rare. The other thing is that when she goes to use her elixir once she's taken damage, instead of going into her little cubby to the north, she can walk out into the hallway to do it. I don't know what prompts this. In fact, trying to get either of these things to happen so I could have footage of them for this video, I just simply couldn't. They're both extremely rare. I have seen her get crit, and I have seen her walk out of the hallway, but only like once each. So there's not a particularly high chance of this happening, but it can happen. Because green units are, you know, special. Now, as I said, both these things are extremely rare. And ultimately, what Nino does is not actually important for the success of the chapter, because ultimately, Nino does not matter. You can recruit Nino with Hector, and then have her talk to Jafar to get the Gaiden chapter, but neither Jafar nor Nino are particularly strong characters. The Gaiden chapter is kind of a pain in the ass. You do get to kill Sonya, which is pretty cathartic. She is kind of the worst. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to the Gaiden chapter, that you shouldn't recruit characters. Jafar definitely has some utility, and Nino, I guess, can heal if you early promote her, but Nino dying doesn't ruin the chapter. It isn't super important. So as stupid as it is that Nino can just kill herself, it's not the most important thing in the world. So let's move on to the next green unit. The green unit that we're here for, the one that if he does die you lose, and that is Zephiel, the most important character on this chapter. But the thing is, Zephiel does not do a whole lot, kind of like Nino, so there's not a lot for him to mess up. There is one thing that Zephiel can do that is really bullshit. When Zephiel's getting attacked, he takes damage, he goes to Elixir, which is fantastic. But for some reason, every time he does this, and this is the difference between him and Nino, because it's not rare, he does it every single time, he gets off of the pillar that he starts the chapter on to use his Elixir. Now, if you don't know, pillars in Fire Emblem give you, I think it's like 20% avoid and like 3 defense, something like that. So they help him out quite a bit. And Zephiel's really weak, so this is really, really useful. But for some reason, he just gets off. I don't know if this is because Zephiel's trying to get away from the attacker, so he moves backwards as opposed to standing where he was. I don't know. It's very strange, but he just gets off of the pillar. Now, I will say that generally this isn't the biggest deal in the world, because a lot of times if he's being swarmed and taking damage, he's likely dead anyways. He is, as I said, extremely weak, and really is only supposed to be fighting 1 or 2 fighters with Iron Axes. If the Sword Reaver fighters get there, or archers or mages, he's probably dead anyways, but he could survive a lot longer if he just stayed on that goddamn pillar. This is kind of minor, but Zephiel also has no animation, which is kind of bullshit in a different way. I don't know, I just love to see Zephiel actually fight, you know? I think it'd be similar to, like, the recruits fighting in Sacred Stones. I don't know, that's a minor thing, but it would be kind of cool if we could actually see some animation. But there is a wide range of Jafar movements, Jafar being the other AI I'll talk about in a second, that I'll talk about. And the point is that even though it's supposed to be only 1 or 2 fighters that go fight him, a lot of times that can vary pretty widely. So if Jafar does some dumb shit, which I'll talk about in a second, he just dies a lot of the time. But sometimes maybe 1 mage or 1 archer sneaks through, and then getting off the pillar is actually really, really important. So it can matter quite a bit. But again, this is the most important character on the chapter, as far as if he dies you lose, but not the most important character as far as the AI doing dumb shit. That is, of course, Jafar, who I'll talk about next. Alright, let's talk about Jafar and how he fucks everything up all the time. I hate Jafar. I think that's pretty obvious. The point of this chapter is that Jafar needs to keep enemies busy or kill them outside of the throne room so Zephiel doesn't die. And you can come down there with your units and save the day. But this requires Jafar to, like, actually fight things. And while his first turn is always the same, beyond that, the AI gods can completely take this chapter over and do some really weird shit. Thankfully, Jafar himself is pretty capable, and his strong offensive stats and a killing edge can mean that he can pretty much one-round any unit he wants. But he's sword-locked, which means all the archers and mages won't be killed on enemy phase. This is a problem, not only for this chapter, but also when you recruit him, not that it really matters here, but this is a problem because he can't kill the enemies that attack him, which means that he has to stay in their range so they continue to attack him. But they're attacking him at 2 range, and he has more movement than them because he's promoted. Alright, so let's talk about his first turn. Because as I said, his first turn and what happens at the beginning is pretty simple and pretty similar. The first thing that he'll do is go attack an Iron Axe fighter. He'll one-round him. Looks like a badass. Very cool, Jafar. The enemy phase is also usually the same. He'll get attacked by a decent amount of units, mostly mages and archers, some Sword Reaver fighters. They'll all have above 50% and deal some amount of damage. The Sword Reaver fighters, of course, dealing the most. But the nice thing is that he actually gets to attack back on them. Now, the point is, he likely won't die. I don't think there's actually even any way for him to die on the first turn, but he will take damage. And this is what leads us to the most bullshit thing about this whole chapter, and the most important thing, which is where he chooses to go Elixir. Similar to the other 2 units, he has a full 3 Elixirs, and he will go use it on that other player phase. Where he goes, again, is super important. Now, most of the time, he'll go north to around the door, the closed door, around where the thieves are trying to get to. This is okay. Again, the most important thing is that he stays in view of enemies so that not only they attack him, but he attacks them. Now, the good thing about this is even though it seems kind of bad because he goes away from the units, there will always be an archer in his view to the south, and he'll come fight that archer. Now, the other thing that he can do, so this is okay. This is the thing that happens most of the time, and it's okay. The other thing that he can do is retreat to the entrance of the throne room. This happens really rarely, but is obviously really good because he'll stand there in the entrance, keep people away from Zephiel. Again, pretty rare, but it can happen. There's one thing he can do that makes this chapter essentially impossible and is the most frustrating thing by a lot, and that's if he moves to the far left just underneath the left pillar. Here's the thing about Jafar's AI. He will only move to attack people he can see. It will prioritize enemies that aren't thieves spawning from the north. This is why, as I said, the standard AI, where he goes to the room, can be okay because he'll go after that archer and not the thieves. However, if he goes all the way to the left, he will only see the thief, and every unit coming from the south will funnel into the throne room. This is, of course, really bad. He will attack the thief if the thief is the only person that he can attack. This is where the chapter becomes unwinnable and bullshit, because even at max movement, there's no way to save Zephiel. And as I mentioned, he will get off his pillar, making this even harder. Jafar can also die sometimes. This is the other option. In fact, when I was coming up with footage for this, he went actually in front of the throne room, which is great, but he died. But a lot of times, even if he dies, even if you get that one, you still can have enough turns. The problem is if he goes over to the left on like turn 2, you can be losing by like turn 5 or 6. Whereas even if he dies, a lot of times you can have enough turns. So these are the different approaches that Jafar can take. Again, the most important unit. And if he goes to the far left, that's bullshit. Alright, so let's talk about the player. What can you do? One of the most frustrating things about this map is the complete lack, shouldn't say complete lack, the general lack of player agency. This is chapter 28 of Hector Hard Mode, which means we're getting close to the end. Now, usually as you get farther in Fire Emblem games, they become easier because you have a lot more tools at your disposal. But this chapter is unique because you really have no tools that are useful here. There's no warp staff, and the boots are in the chapter, in a chest on this chapter, meaning that side of characters with high movement or potentially dancing, there's no way to go faster. Now, what little tools you do have, of course, you should use. Dancing with Nino can be useful. You can even pick her up, dance with her a couple of times, and high movement characters are really, really important. And even rescuing lower movement characters. Even like Marcus, who's probably fallen off at this point, can potentially pick up someone like Harkin and essentially give him 8 movement, which is obviously really good. If you do this, you'll likely be able to complete the chapter. But if Jafar moves to the far left pillar, still probably not. And what if you don't have high movement characters? What if you lost some of them during your Iron Man? Or what if you lost your Dancer? Or what if you just don't have enough? There are things that can happen that will mess this up. Fire Emblem, player agency, and being able to use different strategies are definitely some of the most fun things about the game. And this chapter completely takes out both those things. Now, before I end the video, I do want to be realistic with this chapter. As frustrating as it is, when Jafar does move far to the left, as I mentioned, and you lose, most of the time he will not do that. Similar to what Nino can do. Most of the time that won't happen. In fact, of all the Iron Mans I've done, and at this point, it's almost assuredly over a dozen that's gotten to this point, Jafar has only ever done this on the first time I ever did it, and on the last run I ever did. Most AI variation in this chapter is doable. The bullshit is when you had no chance to begin with, and the fact that this can happen is bullshit. This chapter is an absolute mess from the start, and always a chapter I dread when I play through Fire Emblem 7. And finally, I want to thank everybody who stuck around to finish this video. I hope to make more Fire Emblem bullshit videos in the future. If you have any questions about other chapters you think are bullshit, or this chapter, or what I said, maybe you don't think this chapter is bullshit. Maybe it's the greatest Fire Emblem chapter of all time. I don't know. This is just my personal opinion. I hate the chapter. I'm frustrated because I just lost a run. Whatever. Feel free to comment. And yeah, thanks.